there is to protect the liberty and not do the opposite. It's to give us, in our Constitution, it's to give us a sound currency. But it's not there to counterfeit the money and destroy the value of the currency. If we had free markets and we had free market money, and somebody said, well, I'm introducing these gold coins and I want you to circulate them. But if that businessman cheated us and skimped on the gold in it or defrauded us or didn't have the gold, they would be committing fraud and they would go to prison for that. But now we allow our government to do that. Maybe we should suggest that there should be penalties for the counterfeiting. We're supposed to enforce contract. After the Civil War and during the Depression, when there were gold coins and gold contracts, the government ruled that the contracts had no validity to them. They just threw them out and said, oh no, you don't have to pay in gold, just pay in Federal Reserve notes, let the Fed print money and we'll pay off. So government got off the hook, as well as private individuals did not have to pay gold. So the government was doing exactly the opposite of what they have to do. Our Constitution is not complex. What we need are a whole new generation to grow up and look at this and say the Constitution is the rule book. If a free society actually produced a society where I and others would have less material benefits, I would still argue for the free society. That's how strongly I feel. But we never have to take that argument. We don't have to be defensive on that because we won't be poorer. We will be richer. But if you have a society that's very, very wealthy because we've had free markets and sound money, and we get directing ourselves only to the material benefits and using the government to redistribute these benefits and have a new system of economics, then the problem there is people forget about where the wealth comes from. They forget, they concentrate on the materialism and the redistribution. At the same time, what they forget about is what is freedom all about. And this is what I think this revolution is all about. What is freedom all about? And let me tell you, from my viewpoint, freedom is still very popular. In the 1960s, we were suffering the consequences of the war going on and drugs and all kinds of social problems. But and it was clearly divided between left and right. It was actually more confusing than it is now because I think we're dividing it differently. Freedom and totalitarianism. There's a big difference. When they used to talk about that, I used to hear them say, they said, well, if you were 20 years old and you weren't a liberal, you didn't have a heart. But if you were 40 and you didn't have, if you weren't a conservative, you didn't have a brain. Well, I would like to suggest to you that the freedom philosophy I'm talking about means we should have both a heart and a brain together. Liberty have been around for a long time. You go back to the Magna Carta, but just think, the current administration is actually undermining the writ of habeas corpus and government assassinations, these kind of things. So we are canceling out a lot of things that were developed over many, many centuries. But what about the real experiment? The real experiment in liberty has been in this country. It was the best experiment and the best Constitution, but there's only a remnant left. Know what it is, we can restore it, we can go back to it. It's a lot better than if we didn't have that history. So I believe that the transition backwards is better. But it isn't going backwards. They claim that we are the past, but the people who are the past are the ones who believe in tyranny and big government and control our lives and control our economies. So if go back and pick up on sound money, improve upon it, was far from a perfect system, improve on economic understanding, which has happened with the study of Austrian economics. There's no reason in the world why we can't be the future and not the past as the one of the most important things that we get out of freedom is, our responsibility for ourselves. The freedom means you do make these choices for ourselves, but people are always hesitant. There's one group will say, well, that sounds good, but we can't trust people to spend their own money because they won't take care of themselves the way we think they should take care of themselves. So they embark on destroying the currency and bankrupting the country and taking away our liberties and accomplishing nothing else. So the group that believes that we have to have economic intervention has to accept the fact that people have a natural right to their liberties and their life and the fruits of their labor, and they ought to be able to spend the money as they darn well please. When it comes to personal liberty, you should have your liberty to do what you want. We understand this pretty well when we talk about religious freedom. The First Amendment protects that, and you should never be penalized for it. But it also protects those people who choose not to have religious beliefs. That should bring us together. It should bring us together. Who doesn't fit into that category? That includes all of us. So we should recognize why that First Amendment is so important. The economic issue is a little bit more challenging because people are determined that there will be some that won't take care of themselves, and then the burden will be placed on their neighbor and the government. But that's where the flaw is. You shouldn't make this assumption that there's always the moral hazard that somebody else will take care of us if we don't take care of ourselves. If you're told that you have personal freedom on your own life, on your own lifestyles and your own habits, that you might do some harm. Well, this is true. In a society like this, where there's economic and personal liberty, you become, or it is necessary that you become more tolerant. People say, oh no, I can't tolerate, they're going to go out and gamble and do these things that I just disapprove of. But tolerance, when they don't hurt other people and they only can hurt themselves, is quite a bit different than endorsing something. Because we have religious freedom, we don't endorse the religion that people practice. So why can people say, well, if we have personal liberties, we're endorsing what their bad habits might be? That isn't the case. Right now, what I witness is a restoration of a deep interest in what a free society is all about. And we have to do it rather quickly. And the reason why there's more attention now is the recognition that our foreign policy is failing, it's a failure, and the leadership in both parties at this very moment do not offer us many alternatives. When the Democrats are in, they think a Republican might say something differently. And when the Republicans are in, the Democrats say something else, and nothing ever changes. They claim that, like the administration is saying, they would have a different attitude about the use of the medical marijuana, but it never seems to happen.
Yeah!
I think the medical marijuana issue is interesting because, once again, it can bring people together. Some people criticize libertarians and conservatives for defending the principle of the states making these determinations. The states should be able to make some of these determinations. But some are accused that if you say states' rights, then they paint you as a bad person. But why wouldn't this be the case? If you live in a state where medical marijuana has been legalized, why don't you say under the Constitution that the federal government has no right to come in and override the state? The drug issue is one area where I'm cautiously optimistic because our country did wake up on insanity and the ill-advised prohibition of alcohol. And alcohol, obviously, is a very, very dangerous will wake up, especially when they start looking at the problem. When you look at addiction as a crime rather than a disease, it might be a lot different. If we looked at it in this manner, I think there would be a much better acceptance than saying that we have to throw everybody in prison for these things. So this is where I am cautiously optimistic that one day we're going to wake up, and it might be that the states will just, grab hold of nullification and saying, look, we don't want you involved. We don't want you coming in here. But there's every reason to be optimistic that we can turn this around. Optimistic, one reason, because people are recognizing that we have a problem. We have a drug addiction, and we have an addiction to big government. So if we know we have the addiction, we know that we have to quit. And this is what I think has happened in the last 4 or 5 years. I've been talking about this for a long time, and the reception is completely different since the financial crisis hit, and these prolonged wars have continued with no end in sight. With the bankruptcy on our doorstep, the American people, especially the young people, are starting to realize, what am I getting into? I want a better deal. Bubbles and the prices that we have. But that is important because it facilitates big government. So we can describe what liberty is all about, and we can look for better people to go to Washington, hope they don't vote a certain way. If you didn't have a Fed, it wouldn't be financed. Because the members of Congress, if they kept responding and saying, well, I have to vote for this or I won't get reelected, if they did that, they'd have to raise taxes if they didn't have the Fed. They had to keep borrowing. The interest rates would go up. As long as you have the Fed there, you delay the problem, you delay it, and you can allow this government to grow and grow. And that is what's happened. Almost every war fought throughout history has been fought with destruction of currencies. So in many ways, there's such a benefit with honesty and money. And founders understood this, and they tried to save us from ourselves, but we didn't follow the rules. Matter of fact, they warned us rather clearly about democracy. Don't drift into democracy, because democracy is very bad because rights become arbitrary. Their argument was that democracy would eventually waste our economy and waste our whole system. And it would be consuming, it wouldn't be building wealth. And it would continue by the dictatorship of the majority to the point where the whole thing collapses on itself. So we know what the problem is. We know what the solution is. We need to get more energized. We need to change the nature of government. We need to change the understanding of the people and the role of government. And we can reverse that. We can once again restore the greatness of America with freedom and prosperity.